with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
And I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It is Wednesday, May 29th, 2024. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, with Donald Trump's criminal trial now headed to the jury, or at least one of them headed to the jury, Randall Eliason, white-collar crime professor at George Washington University Law School, author of the Sidebars newsletter, will be here to give us a rundown of Donald Trump's various legal jeopardies. Also on the program, dozens more killed in Rafah as the Biden administration says Israel killing of 50 civilians in tents still doesn't cross that invisible and moving and malleable and not so red line. U.S. aid by sea stops as the piers fall apart. This as another State Department official resigns specifically over the failure of Israel to allow for humanitarian aid to reach people in Gaza. Texas primary results barely favor Republican establishment. Meanwhile, Democrats to nominate Joe Biden well before the convention, ostensibly to ensure Ohio ballot access. Today marks 30th anniversary of South Africa's democratic elections, or first democratic elections. And the ANC may lose its dominance in elections that start today, as South Africa's economy remains unstable and unequal. Sam Alito's alibi for his pro-coup flag seems to have a timeline problem. And the Supreme Court will hear a Clean Water Act next year, case next year. That's not encouraging. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is
Hump Day.
Yes. Came early this week.
Yes.
Or at least it felt like it because we had no Monday.
Yes, the hump, I guess, is technically at the end of the show, but we don't need to get into that right now.
The metaphysics.
I'm just trying to
Is
accurately.
It?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be midway?
It would probably be straight between Wednesday and Thursday.
Exactly. Yes. Because the half of 4 shows is after 2 shows, we'd be at the halfway point, right?
Yeah.
We have 5 shows.
Right.
5 days.
But
this
not
week we
this
have 4.
week.
Oh, this week. Okay.
Yeah. Get out the whiteboard.
All right. All this math. I didn't realize Hump Day was so malleable. I just assumed that it was a static thing and it existed regardless.
Looking into it at CERN.
Look, not all camels' humps, let's say, are symmetrical.
Mm-hmm.
But they exist. They're immutable once they're born with a hump. That's all I'm saying.
Hump Day came from Eve's rib. I don't know, dude.
I don't even know. I don't know. I'm not. It would take me too long to decipher what that means. All right. Let's take a look at this. I mean, just horrible images coming out of Gaza once again, and just it's not comical at this point, but it is just like a horror show, even in the White House press pool. On Friday, we're going to be speaking to Marone Rappaport. He is the editor of the Last Call, the Local Call. But also a writer for 972 magazine, who, along those two publications and The Guardian, have done some major reporting and are reporting out these stories of Israel, essentially been on a 10-year campaign to intimidate and threaten ICC prosecutors, which is just, I mean, it is really shocking on many, many levels. And the idea that it's not getting as much attention as one would imagine is also sort of disturbing. We'll be talking to him on Friday. In the meantime, here is a CBS reporter,
Ed O'Keefe.
Former Fox News guy, right? Ed O'Keefe? Oh, that's Ed Henry. Okay, so this
I'd
is
be shocked if a former Fox News person asked the question in the manner that Ed O'Keefe did.
Me too. But nevertheless, CBS guy asking a question of John Kirby, and John Kirby gets offended, and it's unclear to me exactly why.
Has the president seen the images?
I don't know. I can't speak to what he has absolutely been. He's been kept apprised throughout the weekend on this.
So you're saying the tent encampment that was first struck is considered a densely populated area?
The whole area of Rafah, Ed, is densely populated. Now, there has been 1 million or so who have evacuated Rafah proper, but it's not like they're going all that far away. The whole area is densely populated.
So how does this not violate the red line that the president laid out?
As I said, we don't want to see a major ground operation. We haven't seen that at this point.
How many more charred corpses does he have to see before the president considers a change in policy?
We don't want to see a single more innocent life taken, and I kind of take a little offense at the question. No civilian casualties is the right number of civilian casualties, and this is not something that we've turned a blind eye to, nor has it been something we've ignored or neglected to raise with our Israeli counterparts, including, Ed, this weekend as a result of this particular strike. Now, they're investigating it, so let's let them investigate it and see what they come up with.
But the president doesn't have like a personal limit to this?
The president has been very clear and very direct about what our expectations are for Israeli operations in Rafah specifically, but in Gaza writ large. We won't support a major ground operation in Rafah, and we've, again, been very consistent on that. And the president said that should that occur, then it might make him have to make different decisions in terms of support. We haven't seen that happen at this point.
Why not have him come out and say that himself?
The president has been speaking to leaders throughout the region on a regular basis. He has been addressing you guys in various fora. You've got plenty of opportunities to talk to the president, including, I might add, in a press conference last week.
The last question seems less relevant to me. And supposedly they've come out with a more specific definition of what constitutes a major ground operation. It has to do with formations. And I mean, basically, it sounds like if they march on Rafah like the British would in their, in their formal formations and whatnot. I mean, I don't. Let's be clear. There's no red line.
Yeah, it's only a ground invasion if it's from a certain part of France.
I mean, there's just simply there's no red line.
It's bleeding everywhere.
There isn't. They don't. It is completely ad hoc and how much they think they can get away with, and it really is a function of, in terms of the administration, in terms of their support. 100 civilians have been killed in the past 2 or 3 days that we know of. And I think according to the Israelis, maybe 2 Hamas fighters. Israel has announced that they intend to maintain this invasion through the end of the year.
Just got to see how the election's gonna work out for them, right?
Right,
I mean, if Biden's pushing for Netanyahu to be ousted, and you heard some comments, I think, from or people who work in the White House saying it's hard to believe that a stable leader would authorize something like this, essentially trying to pin this on the one big bad guy, as opposed to this being, as we say, the natural conclusion of Israel's project there. I mean, that was a good question by Ed O'Keefe, and I want to give him credit. I also want that to be another just kind of marker as we begin to move along in time, as to how the press is maybe beginning to catch up on this point.
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen like a question before the charred bodies, frankly, which is, what exactly does those words mean? Major ground offensive.
And what does it matter?
Get them on the record of creating and hardening that line.
And what does it matter, right? If they're dropping 2,000-pound bombs on camps, like, I mean, I understand that the toll of the slaughter, if a major ground operation were to actually happen, which cannot happen under any circumstances, would be massive. But they're doing everything they can but that.
Yeah, of course that should be off limits, but also this death from above.
Yes, shooting fish in a barrel should be, and children in a barrel should be off limits.
I guess my point is, what constitutes, get them on the record for what constitutes major ground operation? Because as soon as, like major ground operation, to me may mean something different than to you. I mean, or to them. I mean, that's the whole point, is get them like on the record, on tape, saying what that is, and then then ask, like, and this is irrespective of how many civilians die. So in other words, you could have anything that is it really is just if it is defined fundamentally by what the attacker, in this instance Israel, is doing, and not by the damage that is being done. I mean, that's because look, if would the attack on October 7th been would it have made any material difference if there had been half as many Hamas fighters than there were? Like, would Israel have made any distinction as to their response if there had been half as many fighters?
The answer,
the answer is, of course, no.
But the answer to your hypothetical from John Kirby would have been, I'm not going to get into the specifics of what a ground operation would constitute. That's within the scope of the Israeli military, although we're across these negotiations.
Well, how could you, then I would ask you, then how do you create a red line if there is no such thing as a major ground operation, if it's all a matter of interpretation?
The versions of these questions, I think, have been asked over and over again of these folks. It's about basically saying, this is the visceral image that we're talking about here, right?
Yeah, I guess.
Charred bodies, a decapitated toddler being held up. What does it matter if it's a ground operation if they're dropping 2,000-pound bombs on refugee camps and burning them alive?
That's my point, is that to define it based upon how Israel goes around killing the civilians, no one would ever say that October 7th would have been more or less of an issue had the number of Hamas fighters been different.
Right.
I mean, that's the point, is that, like, it's, had they used some other mechanism, Israel would never say, well, that wasn't as bad or whatnot, or it doesn't justify. I mean, that's the point. That's where by making it a function of some specific formation that Israel has to have, is absurd, because what difference does it make if the way you measure a red line is how many civilians are going to die. There's no other calculus that should even be entertained. And they're allowed to get away with this. I think in some part, I don't know all the questions that are being asked by the press, but they're being allowed to get away with it by defining it in some sort of like idiosyncratic way that Israel is approaching it. And that's really completely secondary.
And its procedure,
it's
been aided by procedural wartime language in the press about this being an Israel-Hamas war. And if we're seeing a shift on that from someone like CBS News, I'm gonna be grateful for it. But,
I would say a third option is Iraqi journalist Muntadhar al-Zaidi throwing a shoe at George Bush. That's a third option.
That's a third. Yeah, these red lines run.
All right. Well, in a moment, we're going to be talking to Randall Eliason. He is a white-collar crime professor at George Washington University Law School, author of Sidebars newsletter. He has been following all of the cases involving Donald Trump, and he will give us an update on those. First, a couple of words from our sponsor. I've made this many times for Saul in the past, and surprisingly, he enjoys my cooking as long as I do it with one of these recipes from HelloFresh. When you sign up today, you're going to unlock free dessert for life. That's almost like a danger to me. We were just talking about this. So you can satisfy your sweet tooth with a decadent dessert of your choice in every HelloFresh box for free. Want to thank HelloFresh for supporting the Majority Report and also for making it easy for me to make a meal for my, Mila I don't make any food for anymore. I mean, because she's not around as much. But for my son, when I really have very little time to make food, frankly. Go to HelloFresh.com/MajoritySweet and for free dessert for life. One dessert item per box while your subscription is active. You can ditch the meal planning woes. You can ditch the going to the supermarket. Dive into HelloFresh's biggest menu yet with over 45 recipes and more market items to choose from every single week. They're expanding what you can get from them, which is great. You can make restaurant quality meals at home without the high cost of takeout. Plus, HelloFresh's new Ready in 20 recipes are on the table in just 20 minutes. I don't know why they said it's new. They've had that for, maybe they call it something different, but they've had like a series of recipes that you can make 15 or 20 minutes. That's all. Make delicious food a priority with quick, convenient recipes delivered right to your door. All you got to do is you choose your meals, you choose your delivery date. HelloFresh handles all the meal planning, all the shopping, and most of the prep. So all you have to do is open the box, more or less get cooking. Ring in springtime with fresh seasonal produce picked at peak ripeness and delivered straight from the farm to your door. On average, HelloFresh meals have 31% lower carbon footprint than the meals of the same portion size made from supermarket ingredients. HelloFresh's pre-measured ingredients and 100% offset of their delivery emissions mean you're able to get dinner on the table while being kinder to the planet. HelloFresh pre-proportioned ingredients help reduce food waste by up to 45% compared to grocery shopping. I've done other meal plans before, and the best thing, the two best things I would say about HelloFresh is, I mean, the meals are great, but honestly, you can make these meals in 25 minutes. I mean, there's some that are, up to 30 minutes.
And the portion size is so helpful.
And the portion size is really helpful. There's no waste, which I hate wasting food. And you can play around a little bit with it. Like I made this chicken Brussels sprouts, chicken sausage Brussels sprouts pasta Saul doesn't like Brussels sprouts. So I was able to make some of the Brussels sprouts for me and some without Brussels sprouts for him. Super easy and delicious. Go to HelloFresh.com/majority sweet for free dessert for life. One dessert item per box while subscription's active. That's free dessert for life at HelloFresh.com/majority sweet. And also, another sponsor we have, this is really cool. Following COVID and during COVID, everybody bought air filters. We certainly had a bunch going in this office. And the more you read about it, the more you realize, like, this is something that probably you want to do all the time. Have cleaner air, but having an air purifier running the whole time in your house, and particularly in your apartment, is a little bit, it gets a little annoying to have that noise going on. But there is a way in which you can do this naturally, and that is plants. Plants filter your air. However, they don't really do it terribly effective. You'd have to have like 100 plants in your apartment. NeoPX is the world's first bioengineered living air purifier. It's designed to purify the air in your home. It's like a pothos. Is that how you say it? Plant. You know, the kind that sort of like droops down, you know, that comes down and get really long if you wanted to. Indoor air can be up to 5 times more polluted than outdoor air, mainly due to harmful pollutants called VOCs, which are, of course, volatile organic compounds. They used to come off of paint quite a bit, but they'll come off of like the cushions in your chairs. They'll come off of the varnish on your furniture, whatever it is. Cosmetics will throw it off more. So NeoPX was invented by PhD scientists to target 3 of the most harmful VOCs found in your home. It is up to 30 times better than a regular household plant at fighting indoor air pollution.
Wow.
So instead of, you don't need 100 of these plants in there, you need maybe 3. It's based on 5 years of research and development to enable NeoPX to capture and recycle VOCs into useful matter like sugar and amino acids. The science is in the power drops. Each month, you just pour this bioengineered formula onto the plant's soil to supercharge NeoPX's air pollution capacity. NeoPX comes with a self-watering planter called the Shell, so you have to water it every 2-3 weeks, which I will tell you is the only way that I can keep a plant alive.
Same.
I love houseplants. I love clean air. I love not killing my houseplants. That's why we got one of these right now in the office in the windowsill. When you purchase NeoPX, you're going to receive 6 Power Drop sachets, satchels? Well, I don't know, packets. And to celebrate their launch, NeoPlants is offering a 7th one free of charge. That's 1 extra month of pure air. Just click the link below, neoplants.com/majority. The code will be applied automatically at checkout. Shipping available in the U.S. and soon to many more countries. Check it out. We'll put a link in the podcast and YouTube description. Quick break. When we come back, Randall Eliason, white-collar crime professor at GW University Law School, author of Sidebars newsletter on these Trump cases. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Want to welcome to the program, or welcome back to the program, Professor Randall Eliason, a white-collar crime professor at GW Law School and author of the Sidebars newsletter. We'll put a link to that, obviously, in our podcast and YouTube description. Professor, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So, the jury starts deliberating today. I've read what you thought the defense's closing arguments should be. And they centered around basically two what you perceived as fundamental flaws in the prosecution's arguments. The first being that the prosecution hadn't necessarily proved that that Donald Trump knew that the payments to Cohen were actually not for legal expenses. And the second being that it wasn't, he wasn't necessarily, if you assume that he was actually lying about, knew that he was lying about that he wasn't lying about what he perceived to be a crime. Did I articulate that right? And if so, could you just walk us through that and elaborate and then compare that to what they actually argued?
Yeah, basically, I mean, I think fundamental flaws in terms of the defense argument, not necessarily that I would agree that they're fundamental flaws, but I think the defense's strongest argument was based on a lack of proof of intent, a reasonable doubt defense about whether the government had actually shown that Trump himself knew these records were false and caused them to be made with an intent to defraud and to commit another crime. Because I think the defense could have put on a much more effective case if they had simply said, look, you can assume the hush money happened. You can assume sex with Stormy Daniels happened. You can assume we paid Cohen back and it was all reimbursement. Mr. Trump disagrees with all that, but you can assume all that's true. But the government, the charges here are that Mr. Trump himself caused these false documents to be made, knowing they were false, and did it with an intent to cover up another crime. And that's where the evidence has fallen short. I think that was the defense's strongest case, because then it really comes down to Michael Cohen's credibility. And they spent a lot of time hammering on that, of course, which was understandable. But if they had been willing to take all the other stuff out of the case and just really hone in on, look, there's really a reasonable doubt here. Is it really false to say, if I'm paying back my lawyer, that that's a legal expense? You know, when I put that in my bookkeeping, is that really criminally false? Does it really matter if there was a retainer or not? I mean, he was on the staff as an attorney. What difference does it make whether we call it a retainer? And was there really evidence that Trump himself focused on details like how is this being entered in the ledgers of the Trump organization? He's got accountants. He's got people that do stuff like that for him. So you can accept the hush money scheme and that it was sleazy and inappropriate, maybe violated some other laws, but he's not charged with those laws. You know, Cohen pleaded guilty to it. But in terms of these actual charges, the defense their best argument was that the proof fell short of showing that Trump himself knew about the false records. So that was my argument about what their best defense would be. But as I also kind of predicted in that piece, they didn't do that, because the actual defense was kind of pure Trump. So everybody else is lying. They're all out to get me. I'm a victim. And I've got to send my lawyers in to destroy Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels, and spend a lot of time, you know, even though the defense said in their openings, Stormy Daniels' testimony doesn't really matter, which is right. I mean, it doesn't really matter whether the sex happened or not. So they said she didn't really matter. Then they kept her on the stand for hours in an ineffective cross-examination that only highlighted the kind of salacious details of the relationship. So I think, you know, whether it was because their client made them or whether it was, you know, their own tactical choice, I think the defense would have had a much better shot with a really sharply focused, reasonable doubt argument, putting aside all the other hush money allegations and things like that. And they didn't really do that, and they didn't really do it in closing.
And just getting back to their best case that they could have presented, that first element about the retainer question. But why would Michael Cohen even perceive it as something for him to do as an attorney to pay off hush money to someone if he's not directed to do it? I mean, do attorneys, I imagine when he gets hired, right, as a retained lawyer, as a counsel, of counsel, Trump's not going like, and also incidentally, you obviously handle any type of lawsuits we get and this and that. And also you pay off all of my paramours, but make sure you do that 10 years after the fact. Like that to me seems like a weird instruct. I mean, if you're going to put an attorney on a retainer, I can understand that, but it's like there would have had to have been some type of notion that the attorney knew this was in his purview.
And they also paid him more than what his basically fees would have been, right? And essentially to get to pay him back for paying taxes on those payments as well, which also highlighted the unusuality of the situation.
Well, that I can understand. Like if I hire an attorney to like incorporate me and they front the money, I pay him back. But I've asked them to incorporate me. Like not like how does Michael Cohen come up with the idea that this is the person I'm going to pay off?
No, the whole fronting money thing is, as you noted, I mean, extremely unusual. It's not really what lawyers do. I mean, his best argument would be it was a contract. It was a legal contract at the time, putting aside whether it's possible campaign violation. And so he was, helping his client by advancing the money to pay the contract, expecting to get reimbursed. But it's certainly not typical and not something you do pursuant to a retainer. But that's kind of my point. I mean, the defense argument that, this really was a retainer, these were legitimate legal expenses, we weren't really reimbursing Cohen for the hush money payment, it just wasn't credible. It was not credible at all, especially when Trump himself is on the record saying it was a reimbursement. He tweeted about it in 2018 that they had reimbursed Cohen for these payments, and his own lawyer said it in one of the E. Jean Carroll lawsuits, I think it was, where they characterized them as reimbursements. So it wasn't credible to try to argue these were for legitimate legal expenses. What I think would have had a better shot is to say, okay, yeah, it was to pay him back for this and other expenses, so we called our payments to him to reimburse him a legal expense.
Okay,
is that
so
really
the idea is, so the idea
it was a
is
legal
just
expense, it was a payment to my lawyer, right? Yeah.
So
and
the
then
idea
the retainer,
is that the how you named it in the ledger is really just like, how else would you refer to it?
Yeah, and what difference does it make whether there was a retainer or not? I mean, again, they've got to prove intent to defraud. It's not just like a technicality that this maybe wasn't technically true. I mean, we're talking about a felony here, or a crime. They've got to prove intent to defraud. Who's defrauded by whether you call it a retainer in your own internal documents that no one else has a right to see? I mean, that kind of argument, I think, would have given them a much better shot of convincing at least one or two jurors to say, there's a reasonable doubt here about, I mean, the whole thing was slimy and sleazy, and we don't like it, but did Trump actually commit these particular crimes? Maybe not.
Well, I think it's also the problem of the fact that the federal charges on fraud were not pursued earlier, right? I mean, this is basically working backwards from a mistake that was made previously, because I think they could have made a much broader case about Trump's criminality as a fraudster, as someone who cooks the books internally and then also like to banks and to the government, if the civil fraud cases were within the scope of a criminal case. But that's not how things shook out. I mean, maybe you can go over that history a little bit, Professor, but like this piece of fraudulent behavior, or alleged fraudulent behavior, I think could have been a much stronger case, obviously, if it was presented in tandem with the other fraudulent activity. Yeah,
I mean, it's always hard to tell from outside of a criminal investigation all the reasons that went into those decisions, because we usually only know a pretty small percentage of the relevant information, because most of it is secret grand jury. So there were certainly a lot of suggestions floating around of a broader possible criminal fraud case, that would have included Trump himself. I know one of the counter arguments to that was there was no actual dollar loss in these frauds. And so for criminal purposes, often that's not a good criminal case. I mean, they brought the civil fraud case, but there was really not much evidence that the victims lost any money. The banks all got repaid and things like that. So factors like that enter into it. Would have been similar issues about proving Trump's personal knowledge, again, in a criminal case versus that of his attorneys and things like that. But it's hard to say from the outside why they backed away from the larger fraud case. It certainly did look like it had some potential appeal as a larger criminal case, like you said.
So what are the possible outcomes that we could, I mean, who knows how long the jury is going to deliberate? I mean, theoretically, right? They could be, they come out with a verdict this afternoon. But what are the potential outcomes?
Yeah, well, like you said, it's impossible to say. It'd be really unlikely to come back today, I think. I would expect with this number of charges and kind of the gravity of the case overall, you'd expect them to take a couple of days at least. But so possible outcomes are finding of guilty on all 34 counts, an acquittal on all 34 counts, a split, guilty on some counts, not guilty on others, or a hung jury where they're hopelessly deadlocked and they can't reach a verdict on any of the counts. Or conviction on some counts and hung jury on other counts. I mean, there's a lot of possible variations with 34 counts in play here.
And so, just to be remind people, the jury has to be unanimous on conviction of on any particular count. So you could theoretically have the jury unanimous on one count, and then hung jury, I guess, on 33, or acquitted on 33.
Yeah, it's possible. Doesn't seem all that likely in this case, given the facts, since all the charges are so similar and the documents are so similar. It kind of feels like it'll be all or nothing.
If it's a hung jury, obviously, if he's acquitted, that's probably the end of the story for this case. If he is, if there's a hung jury, then what happens? Bragg makes a determination whether to bring this case again, but that seems. Well, you tell me. It also seems unlikely that he would do this again.
No, the hung jury gives the DA the right to try the case again. And then, like you said, that's a decision that they make, kind of evaluating all the information they have about how they thought the case went. Was it a hung jury 11-1 for conviction, or was it 11-1 for acquittal? The factors like that. But pretty common to try again. Usually if you think your case was righteous in the beginning, that you thought it was appropriate to bring it at all, then you will try at least one more time if there's a hung jury to prove
Presumably
it again.
That would not resolve itself before the election, though.
I assume not. It could potentially. It'd be up to the judge and the DA how fast they wanted to reschedule it. It's certainly not impossible for it to happen again before November, but I guess I don't know really enough about New York practice to know how likely that is.
Okay, let's move to the documents cases. What is the next sort of likely case to be adjudicated that Trump is facing?
The most likely is the D.C. case based on the January 6th events. So the Jack Smith special counsel indictment based on the conspiracy to overturn the election, basically the January 6th allegations. That's the most likely of the remaining three, and the chances of that one going to trial before the election at this point are very slim, but it's still not impossible. But the other two, Georgia and Florida, look almost impossible at this point to get to trial this year.
The Florida case in particular, right? Because Judge Eileen Cannon is giving a hearing essentially to every claim that's made to slow walk it so that it doesn't happen before the election.
Yeah, that's been an extremely frustrating case to watch. It's a real failure of the system. That the judge, if you put a judge in place, or if the judge is on the case, that is determined to sort of slow walk it, there's very little that the prosecution can do to counter that. And, this is a case that before a more experienced, impartial judge would have been to trial by now already. It's not a complicated case. But because of the amount of time she's taking to resolve every tiny little issue, as you know, she's now postponed the trial date indefinitely. We don't even have a trial date set in Florida, and just no way it's going to happen this year the way it's proceeding.
Is that inexperience or is it impartiality?
Well, it's hard to judge for certain from outside. And so I'm a little reluctant to assume bad motives, but it could be a combination of experience, incompetence, and being partial to Trump, trying to deliberately tip the scales, and which one of those you think it is, or in what proportion, there's a lot of varying views. But I think there is pretty universal opinion that it's been inexcusably slow.
Is there
for whatever combination?
Is there no mechanism for the prosecution to basically circumvent canon and say, go to the appellate court and say, something's amiss here?
There is. They can go to the 11th Circuit for what's called a writ of mandamus, like an order from the 11th Circuit to order her to act in a certain way. And when they do that, they can ask the Court of Appeals to reassign it to a different judge. That's a really extreme remedy that doesn't happen very often. And one of the frustrations about what's been going on here is that canon's been, again, whether through luck or deliberately, kind of avoided issuing the kinds of orders that might lead to that, because it's just been scheduling stuff. It's just been, take the time she's going to take to consider motions and then sitting on motions for months before deciding them. But she's not issuing the kind of, really clearly legally wrong adverse rulings that then might justify the special counsel to take her up to the 11th Circuit and say, by the way, she's demonstrated this pattern of, bias on the case, improper ruling. You really should remove her. He doesn't want to do that until he's got a really compelling case for it, because you're probably only going to get one shot at that.
Right.
You don't want to strike the king and miss, right? And she hasn't really given him yet the footing to do that, right? The kind of ruling that might allow him to do that.
Do you think that she would have? Do you think that's dumb luck, or do you think that, or do you think she has a savvy that maybe we don't know of, or do you think that it's possible that she's got access to other people's savvy about avoiding that tripwire that might have the 11th Circuit say, okay, now we have something substantial in which we can act upon?
Yeah, I guess any of those are possible. I don't know how we would know, right?
Right. Well, I guess I also am curious too about, Trump wins, right? If you could just reiterate to our audience what would happen to these two Jack Smith cases, and what the future would be, and why it's so important for Trump that the two federal cases right now are being delayed.
Right. That's what's been so frustrating about the whole thing. We're in a unique situation where a criminal defendant is potentially going to be in a position to cancel his own prosecution. That has never happened before. And that was one of the arguments for urging the Supreme Court to act really quickly on the immunity question. People suggested it seems kind of improper to ask them to keep the election, keep the political calendar in mind when they're deciding. Why should they speed it up just because the election's coming? Well, the answer is there's never been a case like this before, where if the defendant wins the election, he can cancel his own prosecution. So this needs to get resolved before he potentially has that power. The people have a right to have these charges tried, and we can't just assume it'll happen in 2025 if he wins the election. So yeah, if he wins, he will have the power as head of the executive branch to order the Justice Department to drop the cases, the federal cases, and that you'd expect almost certainly will happen. He could try to pardon himself. That's untested, and may become unnecessary if he just drops the cases. Unclear, the effect on the state cases would be less clear. Certainly if the New York case, if he's convicted, there won't be much of anything he can do about that at that point. He might be able to get the Georgia case at least put on hold. I think there'd probably be a pretty persuasive argument that a state can't criminally prosecute a sitting U.S. president while they're in office. So maybe that gets, at a minimum, delayed for another 4 years. So he can definitely do a lot to thwart his own prosecutions if he wins re-election. And that's one reason it was so important to try to get these resolved before that took place.
Just getting back to the January 6th case in D.C., which appears to be the only one with any serious potential of having resolution prior to that. what just give us the contours of that and what would have to be proved and what the charge, what he could be convicted of, I guess.
So there's four main charges. There's a conspiracy to defraud the government, which is basically a conspiracy to interfere with the lawful functions of the federal government. In this case, a conspiracy to thwart the legal counting of the ballots on January 6th, right? That everything that happened leading up to January 6th with Trump and his unindicted co-conspirators and others was part of a plot to thwart that government function where they certify the election on January 6th. So that's conspiracy to defraud the government. There are two charges related to obstruction of the congressional proceeding, which is, again, very similar, trying to thwart Congress from counting the ballots properly or send false information to Congress in the forms of phony electors and things like that. And then a conspiracy to violate civil rights, which is to deprive people of their right to vote by taking the votes of citizens in those 7 states where they came up with this phony electors scheme and trying to have their votes basically thrown out or not counted. So all the counts are basically based on the same set of facts. It's the entire scheme between the election and January 6th that used different mechanisms, the phony electors, the pressuring, state officials, the pressuring of Mike Pence, the calling, testifying falsely before various state proceedings about supposed election fraud that didn't happen. All these different steps combined are part of this scheme to overturn the election and thwart Congress on January 6th. So that's the real, to me, has always been the most important case, the most fundamental one, really about the assault on democracy itself. I mean, the classified documents case is important, but it's not in the same category to me as this one, this really fundamental assault on democracy, fighting the peaceful transfer of power, trying to overturn the election results. That's the most significant case. And Georgia is based on the same allegations, basically. But the DC federal case is better chance of getting to trial.
Is that DC federal case, I mean, what do you need to establish here for a conspiracy? Because my understanding of a conspiracy charge is that you don't necessarily need a lot of I guess, huddling between the different members of this conspiracy. But what you need to them to do is all be acting in a manner that is sort of somewhat in concert to commit this crime of interfering with the normal function of the U.S. government. So if Donald Trump sends Rudy Giuliani to file a court case on in one state, that is at least in part evidence of a conspiracy. Is that right? And how much does it play into it that, in Arizona, let's say, if Rudy Giuliani is found guilty of a fake elector in Arizona, how much of that implicates Donald Trump?
Yeah. So the heart of a conspiracy, any conspiracy charge, is the agreement, right? So what you have to show is the agreement among the defendant and co-conspirators, whether they're charged or not, to commit a certain offense. Now, they don't have to succeed, which is kind of the beauty of a conspiracy charge, right? So obviously they didn't succeed in overturning the election, but that doesn't matter for a conspiracy. It's the agreement, the criminal undertaking, the joint undertaking together. And once you're in that agreement, then the conspirators are responsible for what their co-conspirators do, right? So once they've formed this agreement between the president, Giuliani, and Mark Meadows, and all the others that were allegedly involved, then if Rudy Giuliani goes to Arizona and pushes a fake electors scheme, all the other co-conspirators are responsible for that. The partners in crime are responsible for each other's actions. So then the tricky part, like you suggested, is proving the agreement, right? Because can Donald Trump just kind of sit back and, well, I was just sitting in the White House and these people were off doing things on their own? Not unlike the defense in the New York case that just concluded, right? I mean, part of the suggestion is Cohen and Michael Cohen and Alan Weisselberg and others were just cooking this up on their own, and Trump wasn't really involved. And especially when you've got someone who famously doesn't use email, doesn't like to create a paper trail, proving that he was part of the agreement can be challenging. But I don't think it would be too difficult in this case. I think there's going to be enough evidence of these Oval Office meetings and things like that, where all these different schemes were cooked up. And, agreements are often proven by circumstantial evidence, right? Meaning, the example I always like to use for my students is, if you and I get in a car together, put ski masks over our head, go into a bank together, rob the bank with guns, and drive away together in a getaway car, what are the chances that was all just a big coincidence? Right? Zero, right? Obviously, we had an agreement to rob the bank. But you can ask a jury to find that agreement existed. We had a conspiracy to rob the bank, even if neither one of us testifies that we ever sat down and made this agreement. The agreement can be inferred by their actions, and that's sort of what the government would do here.
And there's a recording. The agreement, yes, has to be proven, right? But there's a recording of Donald Trump saying, "I need you to find," I forget how many votes it was, but
11,700. Yeah. And that's only one very small part of the case. But yeah, I mean, there's plenty of evidence like that, recordings or emails back and forth between other people, or Oval Office meetings, like I said, where these various plots were hatched out, things like that. I think the evidence of the January 6th case is very compelling. It just they just have to be able to get it in front of a jury.
What is the biggest impediment right now to this case starting in earnest, I guess?
The Supreme Court. The whole thing has been on hold for months while we wait for the Supreme Court to rule on the claim of presidential immunity. And it can't proceed until that's resolved. They could have taken it quickly. They could have acted much more quickly than they have, and they didn't. And so now we're all just waiting to see, are they going to at least fast track it and maybe decide it in May, or, I guess May is almost over, but maybe, before the end of the term? Are they going to wait until the very final day of the term? The longer it takes the Supreme Court to act, the harder it is for Judge Chutkan in D.C. to then get the case sent back to her, resolve any remaining questions that the Supreme Court opinion might raise about, do I have to decide whether some particular acts in this indictment maybe can't come into evidence due to immunity, whatever, and then go forward with the trial. But she has said in the past that once the case comes back to her, she's going to give Trump about 3 months to get ready for trial, because that's how much time was remaining before her original trial date when everything got paused. So she's basically said,
can I guess when the Supreme,
this is what she's said.
Can I guess when the Supreme Court is going to come out with their ruling in that case? Or let me rephrase it this way, because I do ask this question of all law professors that I've had on the program. We've had a lot, but I'll ask it in a slightly different way. To use your example that you give your students about the ski masks, do you think it's a coincidence that in this instance the Supreme Court is taking this long to address this this question of presidential immunity, where we have seen shadow docket after shadow docket after, so many other cases where they are able to move rapidly? I'm old enough to remember the 2000 election. Do you think, I mean, are we in a two people are getting into a ski mask in a car type of scenario here, or what?
I think probably every justice on there has a different view of what their appropriate role should or shouldn't be here. I don't think there's a criminal conspiracy going on. I do think there are some on the court who aren't in any hurry to push this. We've seen some controversial stories about, some members of the court recently, and their actions that might suggest a certain sympathy to a lot of what went on here.
Yeah, I think that's safe to say.
Yeah. I think, to me, again, you're always trying to read tea leaves from the outside. I think it's fairly likely that quite a few members of the court would feel like, look, the timeline isn't our fault, right? This case got to us when it got to us. We don't normally take political calendars into account when we decide our cases. And so if it took until now for this case to get to us. Whether it gets resolved before the election or not is not really our problem. It's not a legal problem. And so it's inappropriate for you to ask us to speed things up. We'll just handle
Professor,
this in very close. Yeah.
We have you just for a short time, so let me ask you about this scenario. If this is the doomsday scenario that I'm hearing, I mean, from our perspective, that they say that now we're going to send it back down to the lower court where they can determine if it's an official act, and they will take their time to deliberate on that and then send it back, and then we can make an assessment, I guess, about what constitutes an official act as the president or something that where he's in acting in his personal capacity. If that happens, does that affect the timeline of the trial as well? Because then the circuit court has to make that separate determination.
Well, I think a whole lot depends on what the Supreme Court says and how exactly they say it, right? Because you could see them deciding this case in a way where basically it's done for purposes of this case and there's nothing left for the trial judge to do and they can just go forward. Or you could see them deciding it where they say, okay, well, now we're announcing this new 5-part test to decide whether certain acts deserve presidential immunity, and now you, trial judge, have to resolve that. And that could take some time, but on the other hand, it may not take a lot of time. Right? I mean, I don't think it's a terribly complicated question about whether most of the acts in this indictment, assuming they announce something reasonable in terms of what's the scope of possible executive immunity, core executive branch function, ordering troops into battle, that kind of thing, that none of this applies to this case. And maybe Judge Shuckman could resolve that fairly quickly. But it absolutely affects it, because if they give her more work to do, then that's more time she needs to spend before she can get the case to trial. Now, maybe it could be done really quickly and she could still stay within that 90-day window, maybe not. I don't think there would be more appeals back up to the Supreme Court at that point, because now we're just talking about ruling on particular pieces of evidence. It's no longer a ruling about whether you can avoid trial altogether. And so if you analogize it to something like the speech or debate clause, at that point, you can object and you can appeal after conviction with all the other evidentiary issues that come up at trial. But you don't get to go running back to the Supreme Court every single time there's a ruling on immunity.
It's not a question of law. It's a question of facts at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Professor Randall Eliason, white-collar crime professor at GW Law School, author of the Sidebars newsletter. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, folks. I almost lost my voice there. I spent a year in law school, and
oh, really?
Yeah, and and grew up with lawyers. So if there's an opportunity for me to make a lawyer feel a little bit uncomfortable, I will take it.
I mean,
I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, I know. I saw that's what you were doing.
And he was low hanging fruit, as they say.
Well, for me, I actually really appreciate, and maybe it's also because I grew up with lawyer parents, right? Like, there's something to you're going to hear, I think, on MSNBC or other networks, like a lot of coverage of these Trump trials that is more sensationalist and maybe less a little bit about the facts of the case, right? And like from a strictly legal perspective, it always felt like the Stormy Daniels case, the hush money case, was one of the weaker ones, right? He's laid out the reasons why. I mean, we talked to him another time about the fact that like the tie to make it a federal election case may be some of the weaker ones as well. It's the cooking of the books or the bookkeeping part is fairly straightforward, but making it into an election interference thing may be a more difficult sell. I appreciate that, even if it's not necessarily what everybody wants to hear, just because we're at a critical point, and I do think that we could see some of these trials begin to fall apart, even if I don't want to see that happen.
I mean, it appears that they have been successful in slowing the roll of these things. And I mean, look, Alito now, I guess this is as good as time anyway to talk about this before we go to break. So Alito's story about his upside down flag. And I've seen the upside down flag before. It is a sign of distress. You see, I had a couple of friends who were vets in during the Bush years, who would have an upside down flag sticker on their front door or sometimes on their car. And I guess Alito's, he said that his wife had put it up.
Oh, the old blame my wife defense. They're going with that in the Menendez trial, too.
Yeah, these wives, they
Wives
be
bitches.
Well, I mean, I'm not necessarily convinced that it wasn't his wife's idea to put that flag up necessarily, but I also don't know that in any way is exculpatory. Like, you could say, sweetheart, I'm a judge. I'm a big, important judge. But put that aside for a moment. The story that he has released about that appears to have been a lie. So even if you accept that it was his wife's doing, originally we were told that the reason why it was up there, and I'm trying to find his story, here it is. The reason why we were told originally it was up there is because his wife was having an argument with some neighbors. And the neighbors were real jerks. They were putting up a anti-Trump sign, and when she would walk by, they would say stuff like, "You're a jerk, lady." And so she put up this flag that was distressed. And it turns out, and this is sort of amazing, his wife's name is Martha Ann Alito. And again, he said it was her response to, quote, objectionable and personally insulting anti-Trump sign put up by a neighbor. Well, the New York Times, which originally broke the story, the Washington Post apparently had broken the story. It just didn't report the story for 3 years.
Did they know why? Did they ever say why? Or do we know why? Because democracy dies.
You might want to depress everybody.
Yeah, it's a bummer.
Too much. We want some more darkness.
We don't want people to think that Alito is a jerk anyways. So, according to the neighbors, the flag didn't go up after these insulting things. They say that Martha Ann Alito, on a stroll with her husband, used an expletive and called them fascists over the anti-Trump signs on their lawn. Another time, Mrs. Alito ran toward their car and yelled something they didn't understand before spitting at the vehicle.
Right.
The neighbors eventually called the police, and the police declined to intervene. But the point is that the timeline is inverted. So even if we are to believe this was strictly Martha Ann Alito's decision, we have found out that it's not a reaction to what was going on, but rather something that just happened to be almost concurrent.
This is from March 18th, 1993. Village president flies flag upside down to protest Clinton. The village president of the Milwaukee suburb of Thiensville is so distressed over the direction of the country, he has protested blah, blah, blah. Roy What's believes the United States is headed towards a socialist, Marxist, communist state. A little bit redundant there, but anyway, yeah, we know what that meant.
So, to better understand the clash, the New York Times interviewed Ms. Bodden. She is a neighbor.
I love the NIMBY passive-aggressive suburban fight here angle. It's funny in and of itself. Very American beauty.
It's very cute.
Homeowners Association.
Miss Badden, her mother and her husband, as well as other neighbors, reviewed the text that Miss Badden and her husband sent to friends after the episodes. Alito, who did not respond to questions for this article, has in recent weeks given his own explanation of what happened. There are some differences. For instance, the justice told Fox News that his wife hoisted the flag in response to Miss Bodden's vulgar insult. A text message and the police call, corroborated by Fairfax County authorities, indicate, however, that the name calling took place on February 15th, weeks after the inverted flag was taken down.
Imagine you're up against a Supreme Court justice and his wife, and they just can't get the timeline straight at all. And you're just checking them on every argument.
I mean,
so he lied about the timeline here.
Do you think he also maybe lied about who leaked the opinion to the Wall Street Journal or all that stuff about, anyway.
Yeah, I do.
the stuff about the abortion case. I mean, this also addresses nothing, and I know they mentioned this in this Times piece about the other January 6th flag that was flying at their beach house.
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah. That is a complete. He hasn't addressed that.
That was a different fight with a different neighbor about lawns.
Yeah.
A different distress signal.
No, that you've got that wrong. That was just like. Did you ever read Old Man in the Sea?
Oh.
That was his way of saying to the ocean, like you're horrible.
I mean,
you're a cruel mistress, ocean.
He does
flag-based communication.
Exactly. Exactly.
He does have such like the saltiness that it would require.
Oh yes.
Oh yeah. You I think made this point to me. Maybe it was off air, but like the amount of frickin' just rancor. I mean, I don't know, anger towards the world, aggrievement that one has to possess to put up these two Stop the Steal January 6th related flags at each of your homes. But not just as like average MAGA dude in the country that loves Trump. Like there's somebody in my fiance's hometown who had 25 Trump signs on his lawn and we would drive past it all the time. Like, okay, that guy's nuts, right?
Yeah.
But he's trying to stick it to the neighbors.
Could do 45.
This guy is a Supreme Court justice. He's one of the 20 most powerful people in this country right now?
Yeah, but
one of the most powerful people in world history.
Exactly. I mean,
you have all this power. You don't need to do to demonstrate your political opinions, which you're not supposed to have, by the way, through these passive aggressive displays at your home. Like you can change the country. You are empowered. Stop acting aggrieved.
I mean, it is like, wait, who's that guy that Tim Pool talked about with the fist that I had the guy from the Marvel,
Thanos.
Oh, Thanos.
Yeah.
It's like Thanos, be like, I'm so mad that I'm going to put up all lives matter in my window. Like,
Thanos making his profile picture just a black
it's
picture.
like,
yeah,
because that guy with the 50 Trump signs,
right?
He feels frustrated. Nobody hears me. I'm disempowered. Blah blah blah.
Yeah,
alienated.
Alito again, like you say, one of the most powerful human beings in the world, certainly within the country. And that's not enough. It's not enough that we can destroy the Voting Rights Act. It's not enough that we can pull back a 50-year individual right that has existed in this country. It is not enough that we can disempower the administrative state. It is not enough. I mean, we could just go on and on and on. I'm gonna really stick it to all these people who live next to me by putting up a flag.
Right.
It's just insane. It's insanity.
Yes.
But there it is.
And then there's the arrogance piece of like, I know what I'm risking here in terms of my perception of like being an impartial justice, and I don't really care because it's the untouchable piece, and it's the I'm gonna stick it to you. I'm gonna rub my neighbors' faces in it that they can't do anything about this, and like that just is, I mean,
he's literally like
menacing.
One of these bloggers from whatever it was, 2007, going like, I'm drinking liberal tears.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I drink every morning. I have a cup of liberal tears. It really is just the.
Should I bet that I'm getting a second tattoo? And if he has a liberal tears mug, if Alito it'll never get proven, but I want to put money on that one.
The real problem here is I encourage Alito to keep letting his freak flag fly, literally. But why is the Washington Post not telling us this when they know it?
That is a long-standing tradition, it seems to me. But also, I mean, to be fair, and part of the problem also is, with all due respect, the response of people in the legal institution, that is the front line in which that this type of behavior is going to have some type of consequences. And so if you are a professor, I'm not naming any names, but if you're a professor at a law school and you see this, you, at one point, you have to stop pretending that there is the artifice that may or may not have been there in the past. I don't even need to litigate that question. At one point, you have to stop. Like, you cannot be looking out the window, seeing water drip down from the sky and say, like, well, it may be raining, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's a huge blimp that we can't see that is pouring buckets of water out. I mean, there's just no way to know. I can't get into the mind of the weather. Like, let's be clear here. This is not, this is, there are things, I just don't know how explicit it has to get until.
I think, we've talked about this before too. Like, just they're so invested in the fiction of it. And I think, there's probably a shift. Like, my sister just graduated law school, and her position on this and her classmates, it's not the same.
I'd be curious about the professors, because the classmates come and go.
I should ask her, actually.
I'd be curious about that. But I would imagine, again,
but that will influence the future.
Yes.
Yeah.
Part of this is a little bit generational. But also, it's much harder for the more skeptical ones to get into those positions of being the professors, because, the institution protects, they're protecting the church. But
that's how it's treated.
Folks, it's your support that makes the show possible. If you enjoy the show once or twice a week, or 4 times a week, or 5 times a week, become a member. Support what we do. And if you don't have the financial means, send us an email. We'll work something out with you. If you're already supporting us by being a member, get out there, send the clips around. We have YouTube clips. We don't have audio clips because we found that nobody wants to listen to audio clips. Audio is not viral. Video is viral. Follow us on Instagram. Follow us on TikTok. Follow us on Facebook. Spread our content around. Any way in which you can help. Give us a good review on iTunes. Anything that you can do is helpful. Also, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, coffee, hot chocolate.
Ooh.
Great coffee company. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. And don't forget, I'm going on the Nation cruise. I don't mean to rub it in everybody's faces, but
you do.
The food is amazing, and apparently, once you pay, you can eat as much of the food as you want, which I did not know at that last time.
And it's in December, so it's going to be cold here, and you'll be in the sun.
Yes,
right?
Cozumel.
While we're working.
Cozumel and Jamaica and.
Right.
There's one other place too. I can't remember what it was.
Progressive people where you can have a nice conversation and everybody's gonna
and so everybody's either going to be freaking out because Trump got reelected, or just plotting how we're going to demand more from Biden, and how probably angry everybody is at Fetterman or something like that. But also swimming. They get multiple swimming pools, basketball court outdoors. My whole thing is I am going to start a new exercise regimen, and I'm going to wait till December to do it that week.
Sounds nice.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll be here.
Emma!
On ESPN yesterday, we talked about the Celtics sweep. We talked a little bit about the Western Conference Finals, although good job to the Timberwolves for being able to make it 3-1. The updates on the Stanley Cup playoffs, the Final Four there. And there was a major NCAA settlement, over $2.7 billion for student athletes. So there's going to be some back pay for D1 athletes in the major Power 5 conferences, and it lays out the potential for compensation for student athletes going forward. So big changes there. YouTube.com/ESPN show. Matt?
Yeah, Left Reckoning last night. We had a full show. David Griscom went into the election results with the establishment Republicans hanging on, including the guy that got accused of being a rhino and drunk, Dane Phelan. We talked about that. We also talked with Chip Gibbons about Assange and Liza Featherstone about the neoliberal boondoggle that is AstroTurf Fields in your municipality. So check that out, patreon.com/leftreckoning to get access to the post game.
See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Oh, no.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy.
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ Danner.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds.